So now we're going to look at the Middle Ages. At that time, the design was medieval and Byzantine. And so basically what happened was this evolved out of the fall of the Roman Empire. You know, the Roman Empire had gotten too big for its britches, and eventually Rome caught fire. I mean, the whole thing about Nero fiddling while Rome burns was actually true in the sense that Rome burned and Nero was pretty incompetent. They became so decadent, Rome became so decadent and so big that collapse was inevitable. And so they had the corruption of the politicians, there were flooding, which brought in mosquitoes, which meant malaria. People were not wanting to live there anymore. And so as it began to fall, Constantine, who actually was out of the empire, created his own city, Constantinople. He actually is the one who made put Christianity on the map, and a lot of the architecture today in Turkey that is Islamic actually began as Christian architecture. And so this is a map of Constantinople. And from that, we got the Middle Ages, or we're now in the Middle Ages. We got medieval architecture. And it spread because Constantine, as part of the Holy Roman Empire, as compared to the Roman Empire, had expanse and influence as wide as the Roman Empire. And so medieval Britain, Tudor-style architecture like this is part of the medieval style. Very heavy frame timber, stone, brick, infill, some very thick walls. And this is because they started adding multiple floors, like really multiple floors, not just one floor above, but you know, we got this, there's a room under here. Interior, you can see a lot of wood, very thick walls that had a stucco or a plaster or a mud coating, and very, very heavy timber frame construction. And the large, you know, basically saw off the sides of a tree, and remember they did all this by hand, and you get these large timber framing members that you can use to span larger spaces to allow you to have larger rooms, larger gathering rooms. And you can see they're still, just like the Romans, they're still putting a campfire in the middle of the floor to use for cooking. An example of another one. Those big, beautiful, heavy timbers. This is very, very solid, sturdy architecture. Medieval Germany, castles. There were a lot of castles. That is a residence. Castles are residences. That's obviously where the kings and the royalty lived. The people lived in the cities. So these multi-family medieval homes in the cities. Another castle in that style. And in medieval style in Italy, this is obviously a church, or was a church. But these smaller buildings are residences. And this is just the Piazza del Campo. But you can see all these are residences. Multi-family. Beautiful. And out of that time, evolved, right? So within that medieval period, the Romanesque style of architecture came out of it. And you can see it's become more of a style. So whereas medieval architecture was sort of just kind of whatever you had, put it together, Romanesque was much more planned. It was much more laid out on a grid. This is Krakow, Poland, and you could see this is city planning. This is much more intentional. You could see the materials had a pattern and a rhythm going. We have color schemes. We have intentional placing of elements, and you can see we're starting to get true styles in the sense of principles and elements are now being applied. more detail. Romanesque architecture was very hardy, very sturdy, and it's because it started going higher and higher that they didn't know how to use anything other than thick walls. So they put all their bearing weight on thick walls. Columns had been invented and piers had been invented, but when we get to the Gothic, you'll learn what comes next. The Romanesque also gave us the vault. Okay, so the Romans gave us the arch, and if you extract an arch, you get a vault. You get a barrel vault. If you connect two vaults together, so two arches that are perpendicular to each other, and you extrude them, you get the barrel vault. You get the Romanesque vault. And so this is something what they gave us, or what the Romanesque style gave us. And you can just see some examples of different ways of the vault being detailed and put together. And you see these mostly in churches, very high churches. They allowed them to get very high with these buildings. Also, the Romanesque style gave us new ways of capital carvings. They just really detailed. These are still Corinthian, but they're Romanesque version. And later on, the Romanesque was readopted as Romanesque Revival. And these are in America, North America. There's a lot of a Romanesque Revival. There's one downtown Atlanta. It's an older house. It's Romanesque Revival. It was based on the medieval times, but it was modernized. And here's just an example. So it was sort of this combination of Victorian and Romanesque, really, but it's called Romanesque Revival. And you'll see it talks about there are certain things that you do to get this style. So where we're seeing now, coming out of the Roman style, that we're seeing a really more intentional design rather than I'm just doing what works kind of thing, and it just happens that I'm taking materials from what's around me, which they still did in the Middle Ages. They had an abundance of wood, they had stone, they had access to mud, and they put that together. But they started caring more about how it looked. And by the time this came around later in the 1800s and 1700s as a revival, it had a very clear, defined style to it. And now that you see it, now that you look at it, you can go around and notice these types of Romanesque homes or Romanesque Revival homes. And there's quite a few of them in Georgia. The thing about them is because they're made out of stone, you can't burn them down. So these are remaining from when Sherman came through Atlanta. And there's some of these homes to the south of Atlanta. Okay, and so from there, what evolved next was Islamic architecture. And this is actually a modern Islamic house, current. And so the arches had begun to be shaped. The courtyards began to get larger. Towers began to evolve. And we started seeing more ornate detail in the architecture. Domes, cupolas came out of this because if you extrude an arch, you get a vault. If you spin an arch, you get a dome or a cupola if it's pointed. And so we began to see geometric shapes that were repetitive, and that is called arabesque. They also use calligraphy in their design, their architecture, very, very beautiful. Use of symmetry, use of bright colors, all define the Islamic style. The Alhambra was a palace. Alhambra, I can't say that for some reason. It was a palace in Spain, And again, this was before any sort of electricity. So all the fountains in this building are fully gravitational. So the gravity just pulled the water through and caused the fountains to work, and the plumbing. But you can start to see how we're building on the technology of previous civilizations. And there it is from a distance. And here it is in floor plan. You can see it's massive. And you see the courtyards that we once saw that started off in the Greek architecture. You see how huge they are. I mean, that's the largest room in the building. Here as well. Again, another one with fountains. I can't read any of that. I also don't think it's in English. I was going to tell you what it said, but I can't read it. And Alhambra stands for Red Castle. Palace. And Moorish, anytime you hear the word Moorish, it means Islamic. And so, of course, they used red bricks. And at one time, it was probably not pink, but darker red. The sun has just faded over time. And then you can see into the courtyard, or one of those two courtyards, and see how large they've gotten since, you know, the Greeks and the Romans had tiny little ones, and now they're these massive courtyards. There's the fountain. Just like if we just zoom in down there, that's the fountain in the middle. But again, all that was done with putting water in large vats and putting pressure on them, and you can get a fountain to come out. And look at that. That's a ceiling. You look up, it's all these, look, it looks like these stalactites and stalagmites. In fact, it's called honeycomb or stalactite work. It was made out of wood and plaster. It's absolutely beautiful. Obviously, that one's a church, but it was in the Alhambra too, because it's a very large residence. Hawa Mahal, a residence in India. And it's 5 stories, and it's red and pink sandstone. And it has 953 windows so that the wind, the breeze, could go through the palace and kept it cool even in the hot months. So what happens is all these little openings are the same on the other side, and so it allowed the breeze to go through the building. And there are buildings today, modern buildings. There's one in San Francisco that was built in the early 2000s, I believe. It has no air conditioning. Not that San Francisco needs it, but it relies on the wind blowing through the building to keep it cool. And it works. It's just circulation. Here's just some more examples of the architecture. And all this is carved out of stone. And you can see there a woman in contrast to how large those windows are. And there it is from across the street. Okay, so we're going to stop there and continue in the next video.